The smoke was already coming out of the house when a neighbor rushed over and knocked on the door. This was not a small apartment. It was a large home in San Marino, one of the wealthiest and quietest communities near Los Angeles. A place where people noticed when something looked wrong. And that morning, something definitely looked wrong. The neighbor, Maurice, could see smoke coming from somewhere inside. Then he saw the husband. He was standing in the kitchen. That detail matters, because the husband would later tell investigators that he had dropped his 2 sons off at baseball practice and gone directly to work. According to that version of the morning, he should not have been standing inside the house while smoke was spreading from the study. Maurice called out to him. There was a fire. Someone needed to call for help. Someone needed to check the rooms. But the husband did not appear panicked. He did not rush toward the smoke. He did not say his wife might still be inside. He reportedly told the neighbor not to worry because his wife had gone out to pick up the children. That sounds reassuring for about 2 seconds. Then Maurice looked toward the driveway. Her car was still there. So, wait. If she had gone out to collect the children, why had she left without her car? And if the husband believed the house was empty, why was he standing in the kitchen while smoke was coming from another room? At this point, we have to be careful. A strange reaction does not prove a murder. People behave unpredictably during emergencies. Some freeze. Some become confused. Some say things that make no sense because they are in shock. But this was not the only strange detail. It was simply the first one that someone outside the family could see. A little after 9 in the morning on January 6, 2025, emergency services received reports of a fire at the San Marino residence. Police and firefighters arrived expecting what they had been told to expect, a house fire in an exceptionally quiet neighborhood. The fire did not look especially large. Smoke was coming from the study, but the flames had not consumed the house. Most of the other rooms were untouched. Firefighters forced their way inside, controlled the fire and began searching for anyone who might be trapped. Inside the study, they found a woman on the floor. She was 56-year-old Aileen Gao, the owner of the home. She had suffered burns and showed no signs of life. For a moment, the scene could still be understood as a terrible accident. A fire had started in the study. A woman had been unable to escape. Firefighters had arrived too late. Except the room itself did not support that explanation. The fire was concentrated in a limited area. The study had multiple possible routes leading toward the outside. It did not appear that the victim had been trapped behind a wall of flames. The rest of the house had not been overtaken. This was not the kind of fire that would normally make escape impossible within seconds. And there was something else. Her injuries did not look like injuries caused by fire. Her face had been badly injured. Bones appeared to be fractured. Several teeth were missing. There were marks across her body that could not be explained by heat or smoke. Fire victims often die because they inhale toxic smoke. They may become disoriented or lose consciousness before they can find an exit. But smoke inhalation could not explain the trauma investigators were seeing on Aileen's face and head. So the emergency changed. The firefighters had entered a burning room. The police began to realize they might have entered a crime scene. A routine fire response became a homicide investigation, and detectives from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department became involved. But before anyone could decide who might have wanted Aileen dead, they needed to answer a more basic question. Had the fire killed her? Or had someone started the fire because she was already dead? The answer was hidden in the room around her. And once investigators began looking at where the flames had actually started, the idea of an accidental fire became almost impossible to defend. Fire investigators do not look at a burned room the way the rest of us do. To most people, fire destroys information. It blackens walls, collapses furniture, and turns ordinary objects into debris. It seems to erase whatever happened before it. But fire also leaves patterns. The direction of the burn, the depth of the damage and the areas where heat was most concentrated can reveal where a fire began and how it moved. Investigators compare those patterns with electrical systems, appliances, candles, heating equipment and anything else that could have created an accidental ignition. The study in Ayling's home presented a serious problem. Investigators identified not one suspected origin point, but two separate areas of origin. One was close to where Ayling's body had been found. The other was in a different corner of the study. These were not simply two places touched by the same spreading flame. According to the source material, they appeared to be independent points where the fire had begun. That is very difficult to explain as an accident. An electrical failure might begin inside a wall or appliance and spread outward. A candle might fall and ignite nearby material. A malfunctioning device might overheat. But a normal accidental fire usually has one origin, even if the flames eventually reach several parts of a room. Two independent origins suggest two separate acts of ignition. Investigators also found no convincing evidence of a short circuit, a fallen candle or an appliance malfunction that could naturally account for what they were seeing. The fire had not simply happened. Someone appeared to have started it. Now place that beside the injuries on Ayling's body. The medical examination found severe blunt force trauma. Her nose was fractured. Bones around the eye area were damaged. Multiple teeth had been knocked out. Bruising and cuts were found on her limbs and torso. Most importantly, those injuries had occurred before the fire. This meant the sequence was becoming clearer. Ayling had been violently attacked. The fire came later. That did not automatically tell police who had attacked her, but it changed the meaning of everything inside the study. The flames were no longer the central event. They appeared to be part of an effort to conceal the central event. Someone may have hoped that fire would destroy physical evidence, confuse the cause of death or create the appearance of a tragic household accident. But the fire was too small. It had not burned long enough or spread far enough to erase what happened. Instead of hiding the assault, it drew firefighters and police directly to it. There is another part of the attack that investigators could not ignore. The most serious injuries were concentrated around the face and head. Violence of that kind can have many explanations, and it would be irresponsible to diagnose the attacker's emotions from injuries alone. But repeated blows to the face often suggest close-range violence. It suggests the attacker was not merely trying to move a person out of the way or create an opportunity to escape. This appeared sustained. It appeared personal. The source describes investigators considering whether the attack reflected anger, domination, or resentment. Those are interpretations, not proven facts. Still, the nature of the injuries made a random burglary feel less likely. Then detectives found the objects that may have caused them. Inside the damaged room was a metal frying pan with blood on it. There was also a metal baseball bat, also bearing blood. Both showed signs of exposure to the fire. Testing reportedly matched the blood on both objects to Ayling. Think about what that means. The suspected weapons were not carried away. They were left inside the room. Then the room was set on fire. If the plan was to destroy them, the fire failed. Metal does not disappear in a small blaze. Blood can be damaged by heat, but it may still leave recoverable biological evidence. The fire had marked the objects without completely erasing what they contained. The frying pan is especially difficult to forget. It was not an exotic weapon. It was not something that automatically suggested a professional killer. It was an ordinary household object, taken from a home that appeared orderly and successful. The baseball bat was also familiar to this family. Their twin sons played baseball. That alone did not prove the bat belonged to them or explain who used it. But it placed the violence inside the family's normal world. The possible weapons were not strange objects introduced from outside. they were items that could have already been within reach. So now the case contained 2 suspected weapons, 2 points of fire and 1 victim whose injuries had been inflicted before the flames began. But police still had a major question. How had the attacker entered the house? The doors and windows were not damaged. The locks had not been forced. Investigators found no clear signs of an intruder breaking in. The area around the home reportedly offered no obvious footprints belonging to an unknown outsider. Whoever entered either had a key, knew the security system, was allowed inside or was already there. And when detectives checked the home's cameras, they found that the most useful cameras had stopped recording at exactly the wrong moment. A wealthy home in San Marino was not likely to depend on a single camera near the front door. The property had a security system covering important areas. Under normal circumstances, that system could help answer the basic questions: who entered? Who left? At what time? Did anyone move through the hallway leading to the study? Investigators accessed the security records expecting the cameras to narrow the search. Instead, 2 cameras had stopped operating shortly before the fire. One covered the dining area and part of the route toward the study. Another covered the garden or an area connected to the home's primary entrance. The source describes the timing as roughly 10 to 20 minutes before the fire was noticed. Not every camera had failed. The 2 cameras covering the most useful movement routes had stopped. That is the kind of detail that makes a case feel almost too convenient. A technical failure was possible. Cameras lose power. Networks disconnect. Systems malfunction. But when only the cameras that might capture an attacker go dark just before an apparent murder and arson, investigators cannot treat the failure as ordinary without asking how it happened. Was the system damaged by the fire? The timing reportedly suggested it had stopped before the blaze. Was there a wider power outage? The source does not describe one. Had someone accessed the system and turned the cameras off manually? That became increasingly important, because only a limited number of people knew how to operate the system and had access to its security credentials. This is where the crime scene began shrinking the suspect pool. There was no forced entry. The possible weapons came from inside the home. The attacker appeared familiar enough with the property to move through it without leaving obvious signs of intrusion. The most relevant cameras stopped shortly before the fire. This could still have been someone close to the family. A relative. An employee. A person invited inside. Someone who knew the routine. Investigators did not immediately focus on one individual. They examined whether Ailing had enemies through her medical practice, her personal life or her social connections. To understand why that search initially seemed difficult, we need to know who she was. Ailing Gao was an endocrinologist with more than 2 decades of experience. The source says she had studied medicine at the University of Santo Tomas in the Philippines, a respected institution, and spoke Chinese, English and Filipino. She operated a private medical practice treating diabetes and endocrine disorders. People interviewed about her professional life reportedly described her positively. She was well regarded by patients. Investigators did not find a history of serious medical disputes, threats or known enemies who would obviously want to attack her inside her home. That does not prove there were no conflicts. A doctor can have private disputes that do not appear in public records. But detectives were not finding a convincing professional motive. The violence looked personal, yet her professional life offered no clear person carrying that kind of resentment. Could there have been a secret relationship? Could someone outside the marriage have become angry or possessive? Investigators considered people connected to her socially and personally. According to the source, they looked broadly before returning their attention to the family. That early search mattered. If police had immediately assumed the husband was responsible simply because he was the husband, they would have risked building the case around suspicion rather than evidence. So they checked the scene, the victim's background and the people around her. But every road kept leading back to the house. And inside that house was a family that appeared almost impossible to associate with a violent crime. Ailing's husband, Young Lai, was 62. He was described as a civil engineer and business owner who also invested in real estate. The family lived comfortably. Their twin sons were 17 and attended a private high school. Both were successful students and played baseball. Neighbors saw a polished family. The husband dressed well, appeared mild-mannered and participated in community events. The wife was an experienced physician. Their children were doing well in school. From the outside, there was no obvious chaos. But detectives do not investigate the outside of a family. They investigate the timeline. And Young had already given them one. He said he had eaten breakfast, taken the twins to baseball practice and gone directly to his company. He said he learned about his wife's death only when he returned and found emergency services at the home. It was a simple account. It gave him a reason to be away. It explained why Ailing had been alone. It placed him at work during the period when the assault and fire were believed to have happened. The problem was that Maurice had seen him in the kitchen. At first, that could be dismissed as confusion about timing. Perhaps the neighbor saw him after he returned. Perhaps the smoke had been noticed later than investigators believed. Perhaps Young had come home briefly for an innocent reason and simply forgotten to mention it. But detectives checked the public cameras around the neighborhood. They also checked mobile phone location information and cellular connections. And Young's morning no longer looked anything like the morning he had described. The public surveillance footage showed Young leaving after taking his sons to baseball practice. That part matched his account. But he did not continue directly to work. He returned to the house. According to the source, he remained there for close to an hour before leaving again. Phone data also connected his device to cellular infrastructure near the residence around the relevant period. That did not place a weapon in his hand. Cell tower information is not always precise enough to put a person in a specific room. A phone can remain somewhere while its owner moves. Surveillance footage can have gaps. But together, the records created a serious contradiction. Young said he had gone straight to work. The available data showed him returning home. And the cameras inside the house stopped functioning after he came back. Now the earlier encounter with Maurice looked very different. Maurice had not merely seen a confused homeowner returning to an emergency. He had reportedly seen Young inside while the fire was active, before the truth about Ailing was known publicly. And Young told him that Ailing was out collecting the children. But Young himself had already taken the children to baseball practice. Why would he say she had gone to pick them up? Maybe he misspoke. Maybe the neighbor misunderstood. Maybe the phrase was translated or remembered incorrectly. Those possibilities matter, especially in a criminal case. Witness memories are not video recordings. They can shift with time, stress, and repeated retelling. But the car was still in the driveway. The husband's location data placed him near the house. The external cameras showed him returning. And the internal cameras covering critical areas had gone dark. A single contradiction can be innocent. Several contradictions, all protecting the same period of time, become much harder to ignore. Investigators still could not arrest him simply because his account was suspicious. Murder charges require a chain of evidence strong enough to survive defense challenges. There was no eyewitness who claimed to have seen him strike Ailing. The source does not describe biological evidence placing her blood on his clothing. It does not describe a recording of the attack. So police had to keep building. They needed to understand what was happening inside the marriage. That was where the polished image began to crack. Ailing and Young had been married for years, but the relationship had reportedly been unstable from an early stage. The source says Ailing first filed for divorce only months after their 2002 marriage, then later withdrew the filing. The twin boys were born in 2008. As often happens in troubled relationships, the responsibilities of raising children may have shifted the focus away from the conflict between the adults. From the outside, the family continued. But the underlying problems did not disappear. A major issue was property. Before the marriage, Young had prepared a prenuptial agreement. According to the source, the agreement said that properties acquired during the marriage would be registered only in his name and treated as his separate property. That arrangement had enormous consequences. Ailing earned income through her medical practice. She reportedly told relatives or argued in legal proceedings that much of her income had gone toward the household. Yet if the agreement remained enforceable, the real estate purchased during the marriage could remain under Young's control. The source contains a timeline inconsistency here. It identifies Ailing's later divorce filing as occurring in August 2024, but it also describes a challenge to the prenuptial agreement and a court ruling dated September 7, 2014. Because the uploaded account does not fully reconcile those dates, the safest way to understand the claim is this: at some point during the marriage, Ailing challenged the fairness of the agreement, and a court reportedly invalidated it, allowing her name to be added to the family properties, including the San Marino home. That change was not symbolic. Young owned or controlled several properties, according to the source. If the agreement remained valid, he could potentially preserve most of those assets during a divorce. Once the agreement was invalidated and Ailing became a co-owner, divorce could involve a much more expensive division of property. Now return to the months before the fire. Ailing had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. Her sons reportedly told investigators that they had once seen messages on their father's phone involving a younger woman. The messages appeared intimate or inappropriate. According to their account, Ailing learned of them and became determined to end the marriage. Again, this does not establish a murder motive by itself. Infidelity and financial conflict occur in many divorces without violence. Courts cannot treat normal marital disputes as proof of homicide. But the divorce placed pressure on three areas at once: the marriage, control of the property, and Young's public image. One of Ailing's friends reportedly remembered Young complaining that divorce was too expensive. He allegedly wanted the friend to persuade Ailing not to continue because the financial cost would be a waste. The language is chilling when heard after her death. But investigators had to avoid hearing it only through hindsight. Before the fire, a complaint about the cost of divorce could be exactly that, a complaint. People say ugly, selfish things during separation. It does not mean they plan violence. Then Ailing's family gave detectives information that was much harder to dismiss. She had reportedly been afraid to be alone with her husband. When discussing divorce, she wanted her sons or other relatives present. She had spoken to family and friends about concerns for her personal safety. The source does not describe a documented history of previous physical assaults, restraining orders, or police reports establishing domestic violence before the fire. That gap matters. Fear can be based on behavior that was never reported, on threats known only to the people involved, or on a person's interpretation of a deteriorating relationship. Still, the fear existed before her death. It was not a suspicion created afterward by grieving relatives. She had apparently anticipated that being alone with Young during divorce discussions might be dangerous. And on the morning she died, she was alone in the house when he returned for the hour missing from his original story. The twin sons were at baseball practice while their mother's study was burning. Their father had taken them there. When they learned that Ailing was dead, their lives changed within a single morning. Their mother was gone. Their home was a crime scene. And the person responsible for caring for them was becoming the focus of questions they could not avoid. According to the source, both boys were devastated. But grief was not their only reaction. While speaking with investigators, they noticed that their father's description of the morning did not remain consistent. Details did not match. His movements did not align with what they knew or what the records appeared to show. That night, the boys reportedly said they did not want to live with their father. They did not want to return to the San Marino house. They wanted to stay with Ailing's sister, Jocelyn. This is one of the most emotionally powerful facts in the file, but it must be handled carefully. A child refusing to live with a parent is not proof that the parent committed murder. The boys were teenagers experiencing an unimaginable loss. They may have felt frightened by the investigation, angry about the marriage, or overwhelmed by the house itself. Still, their decision had practical consequences. It brought Jocelyn directly into the legal and investigative conflict. She wanted to protect her sister's children. She also wanted to understand what had happened inside the house. Jocelyn had access to the family's security system. She retrieved records and video connected to the morning of the fire. She also hired a former FBI agent to work as a private investigator and examine Young's movements. This is where the case took an unusual turn. Police were already investigating. But the victim's sister was independently gathering material that could be used in a custody dispute and might also help detectives reconstruct the timeline. The security footage reportedly showed Young entering and leaving the residence multiple times after dropping off the boys. Family location sharing data also indicated that he was at or near the home around the time the fire began. The location data was especially important because it came from a system the family had used before the crime. It was not created by investigators after the fact. It was part of the ordinary digital environment of the household. That is one of the strange realities of modern investigations. People may plan around police cameras and witnesses, yet forget the quieter systems recording daily life, family location sharing, home security access logs, cell tower connections, and neighborhood cameras. No single source is perfect. A home camera can stop working. A phone can be left behind. A location application can be inaccurate. A witness can remember the wrong time. But when separate systems point in the same direction, they begin to reinforce one another. The public cameras showed Young returning. The phone data connected him to the area. The family location information placed him at the residence. The neighbors saw him inside. The security cameras stopped after he returned. And his original statement did not include the return visit. Jocelyn sought legal custody of the twins. During those proceedings, she reportedly submitted the material she had gathered: video, location data, messages reflecting Ailing's safety concerns, and information about the family's internal conflict. Those records gave law enforcement additional leads and supporting evidence. Investigators did not simply accept the family's theory. They continued examining financial documents, divorce records, and witness statements. They interviewed relatives, neighbors, and friends. They reviewed the order of events and tried to determine whether each part could be independently supported. The prosecution's eventual theory, as described in the source, was that the marital and financial conflict gave Young a motive. His return to the house gave him opportunity, his security access explained the disabled cameras, the lack of forced entry suggested someone familiar with the home, and the fire was intended to conceal the earlier assault. But theories are not verdicts. Each step had to survive alternative explanations. Could another person have entered without forcing a lock? Yes, if Ailing admitted them or if they had access. Could someone else know the security system? Possibly. Jocelyn also had some level of access, and there may have been others not specified in the source. Could Young have returned home for an innocent reason? Of course. Could the camera failure be unrelated? Technically, yes. Could Ailing's fear have been based on marital tension rather than an actual threat? Yes. The difficulty for the defense was not explaining one suspicious fact. It was explaining all of them together. Why did Young conceal the return visit? Why were the most important cameras offline? Why was he reportedly calm when the neighbor saw smoke? Why did he say Ailing had gone to collect children who were already at practice? Why was her car still outside? Why had she expressed fear before her death? Why did the attack occur during the period when the digital records suggested he was home? This is the moment when an investigation stops being about a dramatic clue and starts becoming about accumulation. The frying pan did not identify the attacker. The bat did not identify the attacker. The fire origins did not identify the attacker. The disabled cameras did not identify the attacker. The neighbor's account did not identify the attacker. The location data did not, by itself, identify the attacker. But the same name appeared near every unanswered question. And the people closest to Ailing were no longer willing to treat those questions as coincidence. Let's go back into the study, because the prosecution's theory depends heavily on the order of events. The medical findings indicated that Ailing's blunt force injuries occurred before the fire. The suspected weapons were found inside the room and showed exposure to heat. The room contained 2 separate suspected ignition points. Most of the house remained unburned. This suggests a sequence, although the final sequence would have to be proven in court. A confrontation occurred in or near the study. Ailing was attacked with 1 or more blunt objects. The attacker left the objects behind. Fires were started in separate locations, including an area close to her body. The cameras covering key access routes were already offline. The person responsible then left the house, expecting the flames to do more damage than they ultimately did. But the fire did not behave as intended. It stayed limited. The smoke attracted attention. The neighbor approached the house. Emergency responders arrived quickly enough to preserve the structure and much of the evidence. If the goal was to create the appearance that Ailing had died accidentally in a house fire, the plan failed almost immediately because her injuries were too visible. If the goal was to destroy the weapons, the heat did not erase the blood. If the goal was to eliminate surveillance, the person may have overlooked cameras beyond the property, along with cellular and family location data. And if the goal was to build an alibi around dropping off the twins and going to work, the return to the house remained recorded in multiple places. There is a common mistake in fictional crime stories. They treat a successful cover-up as one perfect action: erase the camera, burn the room, create an alibi, and the truth disappears. Real investigations do not usually depend on one system. They depend on overlap. The attacker might control the cameras inside the home but not a neighbor's memory. They might think about the front door but not the cell tower. They might think about the cell phone but not the family location application. They might think fire destroys blood but not understand what forensic laboratories can recover from heated metal. They might remember to give police a destination but forget that public cameras can trace the route. The strongest part of this case is not one spectacular forensic breakthrough. It is the way ordinary pieces of information begin correcting one another. Morris's account makes the location data more meaningful. The location data makes Yon's original statement more suspicious. The camera shutdown makes the return visit more important. The lack of forced entry makes knowledge of the security system relevant. The divorce makes the timing of the confrontation significant. Ailing's earlier fear makes the private marital conflict impossible to ignore. The 2 fire origins transform the flames from an accident into part of the suspected crime. The weapons connect the assault to objects left inside the house. And the limited burn damage preserves the very evidence the fire may have been intended to erase. There is still an uncomfortable gap. The uploaded source does not identify direct forensic evidence proving who held the frying pan or bat. It does not describe fingerprints, DNA from the accused or surveillance footage of the attack. That is why this appears to be a circumstantial case. The word circumstantial is often misunderstood. It does not mean weak. It means the conclusion is reached through connected facts rather than a direct observation of the crime. A witness saying, "I saw him strike her," would be direct evidence. A camera recording the assault would be direct evidence. Location records, inconsistent statements, motive evidence, opportunity, security access, and fire patterns are circumstantial. A circumstantial case can be powerful when the facts form a chain that excludes reasonable alternatives. It can also fail when the defense breaks one or more important links. Young's lawyers would eventually challenge whether the prosecution had built such a chain. Before that legal battle began, detectives spent months adding detail. They reviewed financial records to understand what the divorce could cost. They examined court filings connected to the property dispute. They interviewed dozens of people who knew the couple. They collected statements about Ailing's fear and Young's comments regarding the expense of separation. They compared the different movement records from the morning of January 6th. They considered how the cameras could have been disabled. They looked at who could move through the house without forcing entry. 6 months passed. For Ailing's family, that probably felt unbearably slow. From an investigative perspective, it shows how carefully prosecutors believed the case needed to be assembled. Police had suspicions early. Suspicion was not enough. A rushed arrest could allow the defense to argue that investigators had locked onto the husband and ignored other possibilities. The eventual arrest came on July 3, 2025. Young Lai was taken into custody and accused of killing his wife and setting the fire. The district attorney described Ailing's death as a preventable tragedy and promised to seek justice. But the arrest did not resolve the case. It simply moved the fight from the investigation into the courtroom. Young pleaded not guilty. That fact has to remain at the center of any responsible account. Being arrested is not the same as being convicted. A judge allowing a case to proceed is not the same as a jury finding guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The evidence described by prosecutors may appear compelling, but the defense is entitled to challenge how it was obtained, what it actually proves, and whether investigators excluded other reasonable possibilities. At an early court appearance, bail was set at $2.25 million. The source says Young was able to post bail and was temporarily released while the case moved forward. His attorneys submitted a 44-page motion challenging the prosecution from several directions. The source broadly describes 4 categories of argument, including whether investigative procedures were lawful and whether the evidence was sufficient or admissible. Those challenges are not technical distractions. They are part of how criminal courts test a case. If police obtained digital records without proper authority, the defense could try to suppress them. If location information was presented as more precise than it actually was, the defense could attack the interpretation. If witness statements changed over time, the defense could question reliability. If the camera system could fail without human interference, the shutdown might not prove intentional concealment. If multiple people had access to the house, the absence of forced entry might not point only to the husband. If marital conflict was used as motive evidence, the defense could argue prosecutors were turning an unpleasant divorce into proof of murder. Every powerful-looking fact has a legal weakness if it is stretched beyond what it can support. Consider the location evidence. A cell tower can show that a device connected within a broad area. It does not necessarily place the user inside a particular room. Family location sharing data can be more precise, but accuracy varies by device, signal and settings. Public video may show a vehicle arriving, yet questions can remain about who was driving or the exact time. The neighbor's statement may place Young in the kitchen, but the defense can examine when Maurice first made the statement, whether he was certain of the timing and whether his memory was influenced by later news. The cameras may have stopped when Young was home, but coincidence is not impossible. The marriage may have been collapsing, but many people facing expensive divorce do not commit violence. The prosecution's answer would likely be that the case does not depend on any single one of those facts. The timeline works because the evidence overlaps. The defense's task is to show that overlap creates suspicion, not certainty. The source reports that on January 13, 2026, a Los Angeles Superior Court judge rejected a defense effort to dismiss the charges. The judge found sufficient evidence for the case to continue and ordered Young back into custody without bail. That ruling did not decide whether he killed Ailing. It decided that the prosecution had presented enough evidence for the criminal proceedings to move forward. According to the source, prosecutors were also considering whether to seek the death penalty. If they did not pursue death, a conviction on the most serious charges could still result in life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Because the matter was still pending in the account provided, there was no final verdict to explain. No jury conclusion. No completed trial. No final judicial determination of guilt. That uncertainty changes the ending of this story. Gray verdict files cannot close the folder and say justice has already been delivered. The folder is still open. But even before a verdict, the consequences for the family are permanent. Ailing is dead. The twins lost their mother. Their father has been accused of killing her. They were placed under the guardianship of their aunt and reportedly remained at the same school, continuing their baseball activities. That detail feels almost painfully ordinary. School continued. Baseball continued. Assignments, practices, and daily routines continued. But the family structure around those routines had collapsed. The bat found in the burn study existed in the same world as their baseball practice. Their father had driven them to that practice on the morning their mother died. They were away from the house during the critical period. And when they began questioning his account, they became part of the evidence surrounding the case against him. The children did not simply lose two parents in different ways. They were forced into the position of helping authorities examine whether one parent was responsible for the death of the other. There is no version of the final verdict that restores what existed before January 6th. It would be easy to tell this as a story about greed. A wealthy man faced an expensive divorce, so prosecutors believe he killed his wife to preserve property. That version is simple. Maybe too simple. Financial motive is important, but money in this case appears connected to something deeper: control. The prenuptial agreement allegedly placed future property in Yon's name. That gave him a kind of structural advantage from the beginning of the marriage. Ailing's income helped support the household, according to the source, yet the agreement could leave her without ownership of the real estate accumulated during those years. When she challenged the arrangement and gained co-ownership, the balance changed. She was no longer simply asking to leave. She could leave with a legal claim to assets that Yon may have considered his. The source's closing commentary attempts to explain Yon through the concept of avoidant attachment, emotional distance, and a need for control. That psychological interpretation is speculative. There is no clinical evaluation in the material proving he had a particular personality disorder or attachment style, and it would be wrong to present such a diagnosis as established fact. What the documented behavior can support is narrower. He reportedly created a financial agreement protecting property in his own name. He was accused by family members of having intimate messages with a younger woman. He complained about the financial cost of divorce. His wife expressed fear about meeting him alone. His original account of the morning omitted his return to the house. Those facts do not require a diagnosis. They describe a marriage in which trust had broken down, property was contested, and one spouse reportedly felt unsafe. The public image made that breakdown harder to see. People saw an engineer and business owner. They saw a physician with a respected practice. They saw two successful children. They saw a large house in a quiet community. Wealth can create the impression that a family has escaped ordinary dangers. There are resources, education, professional status, and social connections. Problems are assumed to be manageable because the people involved appear capable and accomplished. But status can also conceal conflict. Ailing's fear did not become less serious because she was a doctor. The property dispute did not become less bitter because the homes were expensive. The children did not become less vulnerable because they attended a private school. The quietness of San Marino made the fire feel shocking, but it did not make the home immune to violence. This is one of the central contradictions of the file. Everything outside the house suggested stability. Almost every important clue came from inside the family's own systems. The weapons were household objects. The camera controls belonged to the home. The location data came from family sharing. The possible motive grew from the marriage and its finances. The most important concerns had been shared with relatives. The sons noticed the inconsistencies. The sister preserved and organized the digital material. The danger, if the prosecution is correct, was never an outsider forcing a way into the neighborhood. It was someone who did not need to break in. That is why the intact locks matter so much. Not because locked doors make a perfect mystery. Because they reveal the limits of physical security. A house can have cameras, alarms, gates and expensive locks. Those systems are designed to keep strangers out. They are far less useful when the person posing the danger already knows the password. There are cases built around one impossible piece of evidence. A fingerprint in a place it should not be. DNA preserved for decades. A hidden recording. A single witness who changes everything. This case feels different. Its power comes from details that seem small when viewed alone. A car in the driveway. A camera that stopped. A missing hour in a timeline. A phone connected to a nearby tower. A family location marker. A comment about picking up children. A divorce filing. A complaint about money. A wife who did not want to be alone with her husband. A frying pan exposed to heat but not destroyed. A bat carrying blood. A second point of ignition in the corner of a room. None of these details speaks. They have to be placed beside one another. Take the car. If Maurice had only remembered Young saying Ailing was out, the statement might have seemed like a misunderstanding. The car made him question it. Take the camera failure. If Young had remained at work all morning, the malfunction might look unrelated. His return made the timing suspicious. Take the return visit. If he had told police about it immediately, he could have offered an explanation. The omission made investigators wonder what happened during that hour. Take Ailing's fear. Without the death, relatives might remember it as part of a difficult divorce. After the violent attack, the fear became potentially predictive. Take the fire. Without the blunt force injuries, it could have remained a tragic accident. Without the two ignition points, someone might still argue the flames began naturally. Without the limited damage, evidence might have been lost. Every piece changes the meaning of the others. This is also why the case cannot responsibly be reduced to the husband's reaction. People often say a suspect did not cry enough or seemed too calm. That kind of judgment is dangerous. There is no correct way to react when a spouse dies. Shock can look like emotional emptiness. Trauma can produce strange behavior. Young's calmness, by itself, proves nothing. The concern is not simply that he appeared calm. It is that the calm reaction was connected to a statement that did not fit the visible facts. He reportedly said Ailing had left to collect the children, although the children had been taken to practice and her car remained outside. He reportedly claimed to have gone directly to work, although video and digital data placed him back at the home. The case is not about whether he looked sad enough. It is about whether his words accurately described what he knew and where he had been. That distinction matters. A responsible investigation does not punish emotion. It tests facts. The same care must apply to the sons. Their refusal to live with their father is powerful, but it is not a verdict. Their value to the investigation came from the specific information they provided, the marital conflict, the messages on the phone, their mother's determination to divorce and the inconsistencies they noticed in the morning timeline. Jocelyn's role must also be understood carefully. She was not a neutral investigator. She was Ailing's sister, grieving and trying to obtain custody of the children. She had strong personal reasons to suspect Young. That potential bias does not make the evidence false. It means law enforcement needed to verify it independently. The security records, location data and court materials gained weight only when they could be authenticated and compared with other sources. The former FBI agent she hired may have helped organize the information, but a private investigation does not replace police procedure. It can preserve material. It can identify leads. It can bring overlooked facts to the attention of detectives. The criminal case still has to stand on evidence accepted by the court. And that may be the most important reason the arrest took 6 months. The outline of suspicion appeared quickly. The legal structure took time. Everything keeps returning to the same period. Young dropped the twins at baseball practice. He returned home. He remained there for close to an hour. The internal cameras covering important routes stopped. Ailing suffered fatal violence. 2 fires were started in the study. Smoke became visible. Maurice approached and found Young inside. Young said his wife had gone to pick up the children. Her car was in the driveway. He later told police he had gone directly to work. That hour is the center of the prosecution's case. But because the source does not provide a recording of what happened inside the study, the hour remains partly hidden. We can reconstruct only what the evidence is said to support. Ailing was alive before the assault. Her injuries preceded the fire. The attacker had access to the home. The suspected weapons were left near her. The fires began in 2 places. The cameras had stopped. Young was near or inside the residence. That is a powerful reconstruction. It is not the same thing as seeing the crime happen. The defense may argue that investigators filled the unseen parts with assumptions. Prosecutors will argue that the physical and digital evidence leaves no reasonable innocent explanation. A jury, if the case reaches that stage, will be asked to decide which interpretation survives. Could another person have entered? Could the security system have failed? Could Young have returned and left while Ailing was still alive? Could someone arrive through an unmonitored route? Could the neighbor's timing be wrong? Could the location data be misleading? Those are not absurd questions. The burden remains on the prosecution. But an alternative theory must do more than suggest that something else is theoretically possible. It has to account for the entire pattern. It has to explain why Young's timeline was false or incomplete. It has to explain the camera shutdown. It has to explain his presence. It has to explain the statement to Maurice. It has to explain the conflict and fear. It has to explain who else could enter without force, attack Ailing, start 2 fires and leave without appearing on the available external recordings. The defense does not necessarily have to identify another attacker. Legally, it may be enough to create reasonable doubt. But narratively, this is why the file is so difficult to put down. The evidence keeps asking the same question from different directions. What happened during the hour Young originally said did not exist? The name Gray Verdict Files fits this case for a reason. There is no final black and white ending in the source material. There is a dead woman, an accused husband, 2 children caught between them and an evidence chain that appears strong enough for a judge to order the case forward. But there is not yet a final verdict. That means the language matters. It is accurate to say Ailing was killed before the fire. It is accurate, based on the source, to say investigators concluded the fire was deliberately set. It is accurate to say Young's original timeline was contradicted by video and digital data. It is accurate to say he was arrested and charged. It is accurate to say he pleaded not guilty. It is accurate to say a judge found sufficient evidence for the prosecution to continue. It is not accurate, at this stage, to state as a settled fact that he committed the murder. The family may feel certain. Investigators may feel certain. Prosecutors may believe the evidence proves their theory. The court process exists because belief, even sincere belief, is not the same as a lawful verdict. Still, some truths do not depend on the outcome of the trial. Ailing had built a life defined by work, family, and professional respect. She treated patients for more than 20 years. She raised 2 sons. She helped create a household that, from the outside, represented stability and success. Near the end of her life, she was trying to leave her marriage. She reportedly told people close to her that she was afraid. On the morning of January 6th, she was found in a room where 2 fires had begun. The fires did not hide what happened to her. They revealed it. That may be the final paradox of this case. The act that appears designed to erase the crime became the reason emergency responders entered the house. The smoke brought the neighbor. The neighbor saw the husband. The firefighters preserved the room. The limited flames left the suspected weapons intact. The burn patterns exposed the separate ignition points. The fire did not close the file. It opened it. And once it opened, the family's ordinary digital systems began speaking. A camera recorded a return home. Another system recorded a location. A security log marked the moment the cameras stopped. A phone connected to the area. The children remembered what their parents had been fighting about. The sister recovered records. Friends remembered Ailing's fear. A complaint about the cost of divorce gained a darker meaning. A car remained in the driveway. These are not dramatic objects by themselves. Most of them existed before the crime as forgettable parts of daily life. That is what makes them unsettling. The truth was not hidden in some distant laboratory or secret witness. It was scattered through the house, the phones, the driveway, and the memories of the people nearby. The frightening possibility is not simply that someone may have planned a murder. It is that the plan may have depended on everyone accepting the first explanation. A fire. A terrible accident. A woman unable to escape. A husband away at work. But the room was not burned enough. The injuries did not fit. The cameras stopped too conveniently. The timeline did not hold. And the husband who said his wife had gone to collect the children was standing inside a house while her car remained outside. That takes us back to the beginning. Maurice at the door. Smoke behind the walls. Young in the kitchen. A simple statement that was supposed to make the situation less alarming. She is not here. She went to get the children. Maybe, in another case, everyone would have accepted it. Maybe the neighbor would have walked away. Maybe the fire would have spread. Maybe the study would have been destroyed. Maybe the death would have been recorded as a tragedy before anyone looked closely at the body. But Maurice noticed the car. Firefighters noticed the injuries. Investigators noticed the 2 origins. Detectives noticed the missing hour. The family noticed the contradictions. And one by one, those small observations forced the official story to change. Not because one person immediately understood everything. Because several people refused to ignore what did not make sense. That is where this case leaves us. Not with a final verdict. Not yet. It leaves us with a question that appears in almost every difficult investigation. How many details have to feel wrong before we stop calling them coincidences? And how long can the truth remain hidden when the first version of events sounds just reasonable enough to believe? In Ailing Gau's case, it may have remained hidden much longer if the fire had been larger, the neighbor less observant, or the digital records less persistent. Instead, the smallest failures in the alleged plan became the strongest parts of the case. A fire that did not spread. A camera that stopped at the wrong time. A location record no one remembered to erase. A car that never left the driveway. And an hour that disappeared from a husband's story, but not from the evidence. The court will decide what that hour ultimately proves. But whatever the verdict may be, the morning of January 6th has already exposed something the family's polished public life managed to hide for years. A beautiful house can conceal fear. Professional success can coexist with private instability. Financial security does not guarantee personal safety. And sometimes, the most important evidence is not the detail that looks dramatic. It is the detail that quietly refuses to fit.